Okay, good morning, everyone, and thank you again for being with us. My name is Annika Smith, and I'm Associate Professor at Windsor Law and Director of the Center for Cities based at Windsor Law, University of Windsor. I'm coming to you today from the traditional territory of the Three Fires Confederacy, the Ojibwe, the Odawa, and the Potawatomi people. I want to welcome you to this session, this first of our four weekly sessions during June, hosted by the Center for Cities at Windsor Law, and want to acknowledge the support of both the Canadian Urban Institute and the Smart Prosperity Institute at Ottawa U in bringing you these four sessions. The four sessions are a follow-up to a housing summit that we held in March of this year, and I know that many of you that are with us today were there as well. Thank you very much for coming back. That two-day event was an excellent opportunity to get a taster of some of the pieces of a housing systems approach that is necessary at this moment in dealing with the unprecedented housing crisis in this country. And these four sessions that will follow from today over 4 Tuesdays in June will be an opportunity to dig deeper into some of the policy tools that we introduced or that our speakers introduced during that housing summit. Absolutely thrilled to be able to start that session, that session of 4 today, talking about target market analysis, building the housing that people want and need, and to welcome back Sharon Woods, who was with us at the Housing Summit, as were others of our participants today, to lead us in a much more in-depth exploration of target market analysis and the successes that it's had in the United States, and to think about the opportunities for target market analysis in Canada as well. I want to acknowledge, before we jump in, the organizing team for this workshop, as with the Housing Summit back in March. First of all, Princess Doe, who is a just graduated or just graduating Windsor Law student, who has stayed on with us to work with us for I think we're into a 3rd year now, working in particular on housing policy with us at the moment. So thank you so much, Princess. She'll be off camera today because she's nursing a bit of a cold. Then I'll turn to Jim Tischler, who I think is with us as well, visiting fellow with the Center for Cities and also development director for the Michigan State Land Bank. Thank you so much, Jim. We learn every day from your expertise. And then Rino Bortolin, Windsor City Councillor for Ward 3, the downtown ward, and chair of the Planning and Heritage Standing Committee. So thank you so much to the three of you for being an immense part of bringing these sessions together. Good. Now let me turn to introducing our three speakers, our several speakers today. And I'll just say Princess will be putting bios in the chat, so I'll be very brief and just giving titles and organizations along with the names in my introduction. So first, Sharon Woods, as you mentioned, CEO of LandUseUSA, and you'll hear from Sharon in the first hour today. Rino Bortolin, I've introduced already. Tom Fehrenbach, Director of Planning, Building and Development for the City of East Lansing. Dorian Moore, Vice President and Architect with Archive DS. And Justin Sprague, Vice President of Community Image Builders or CIB Planning. So thank you very much to all of you for being here. And then Grayson Johnson, who is Senior Specialist Innovation and Research with CMHC, the Canada Mortgage and Housing Corporation, will be moderating the second half of our event today. So thank you so much, Grayson, for coming back and being with us again. No stranger to Windsor as well, for those of you who are joining us from Windsor today. So let me just give you a bit of the lay of the land. The first hour, again, up until about 12:30 or maybe just a touch after, given that we've started it a little bit late. You'll be hearing from Sharon. She'll have a PowerPoint presentation. This will be pretty much straight lecture format to give us, again, the tools, the basics of TMA. If there are questions, you are welcome to add those at any time using the Q&A function. And we will take, again, a moment or a few moments at the end of Sharon's presentation for any clarification questions at that point. We'll then break for about 5 minutes. We'll come back with our discussants and Grayson will lead us in that conversation at that point. There too, we will have and more time for Q&A. So please feel free, again, to put your questions in there at the moment. They won't appear immediately because they have to be approved to be put up, but just to make sure that we are maintaining standards of decency and respect in the questions that are being posted. So that's the only screen that we're using. Otherwise, we will post your questions. Even if we don't get to all of them, we want to make sure that the dialogue is in multiple directions here. So please do feel free to post your comments and to post who you are and why you're here. I think that is all that I wanted to say at this point. Team, have I forgotten anything else that we should mention right now? Perfect. Okay, well, in that case, thank you again to everyone for being here. Thanks to all our panelists. And Sharon, the floor is yours.
Thank you. I think actually sharing has been disabled, so maybe we might have to click a button somewhere.
You should be good to go now.
Yeah, there we go. And I'm going to share my screen and go into PowerPoint and go into, hopefully you can see the home page here where it just says the 7th of June. Great. So I'm just going to dive into the presentation. And so our topic today is target market analysis. And again, the theme is building the housing that people want and need. So the purpose is to help you understand a target market analysis as a research tool to help you guide future land use planning and investment decisions. I have about 50 slides. I don't think it'll even take me 50 minutes. Maybe I'll get through it in about 40. I'm going to explain what is a TMA, provide an example, and then we'll do some Q&A. And if you would like to reach out to me after today's session, you can send me an email at sharonwoods@landuseusa.com, and my cell phone number is there, so you could do a screen capture. I think I have this at the end as well. If you didn't quite catch that, I have it one more time. We have some panelists that will talk with you later. All friends of mine, Rino, Tom, Dorian, and Justin are all experts in the field, and I'm really looking forward to a good conversation and discussion later. So real quickly, what is a target market analysis? And basically, it's a study of lifestyle preferences of groups of households that are likely to consume new products, goods, or services. So if we know that they're inclined to choose a product, then we could identify them as an ideal target, and I call them a target market. So I'm going to show you later that the data that we use in the United States anyway, there's 71 different lifestyle clusters. And for a given market like Windsor, we could go in and just identify the top 10 or the top 20 that represent ideal target markets for missing middle housing, for example. So what kinds of preferences? We can do this kind of analysis for retail, housing, you name it, placemaking, entertainment venues, lots of different industries that this data is used for. And so I'm not the only one who uses it. It's quite extensively used by many corporations and businesses to identify their target markets for their products. Why is this valuable? Well, first of all, we want to make sure that we know how much housing to build and how fast, and to optimize the absorption rates. So it helps us with that. It helps us also with building formats, building sizes, unit sizes, tenure, which is owner versus renter, and then unit sizes, I already said that. And then I often do these studies to help developers avoid risky development mistakes that can cost a lot of time and money. So often I'll have developers say, you know, should I build condos or apartments? And my job is to keep them out of trouble. And then to improve overall market competitiveness within your territories or provinces or cities. So within certain markets or geographies, we can help some communities become more competitive if they've struggled in the past. We can also use the data to figure out ways to intercept migrating households that might be choosing some places in Ontario, but maybe bypassing others. So, you know, the data will help us understand that. And then, of course, how we use the results, how we use the study when we're done is to hopefully use it to guide planning documents and updates to your zoning ordinances. So usually these studies are done before a master plan update or a zoning ordinance rewrite. And then sometimes we do the studies just to demonstrate that we've done some due diligence in a community. So Windsor would do some due diligence, and that might enable you to recruit more developers and investors. And again, you know, to just basically let's educate ourselves in understanding what the market potential really is. Who can benefit? This is kind of redundant. Develop the entire development and investment community, everyone from lenders to property owners, developers and builders, investors, you name it, and then the planning professionals, municipal leadership, council people, city managers, you name it, and then residents, even the residents of neighborhoods who feel strongly about the future of housing on their block or in their neighborhood. And then, of course, agencies, universities, angel interest groups that might be potential investors. When do we do a study? So again, I already said some of this, but usually before you get too deep into doing a massive like master plan rewrite or zoning ordinance rewrite, if you're doing other studies already, like an affordable housing study, this is a special kind of study that we do in the US to really focus in on affordability. Maybe you're doing a retail market study, and maybe you're preparing to collaborate with some developers or investors on some real projects, and you want to understand the market. And then the big whammy, right, is the significant market events. If we have an economic recession or we have a health pandemic that spins us into an economic crisis, when we start pulling out of that, that's the good time to refresh the data and figure out what has changed and where are we at today. Geography is very important. So understanding that if I were to do, for example, hypothetically, a study for Windsor, I would really want to study Ontario as well. I would pull the data for a large geography and then study a smaller geography within that place. So really imagining that it's not just a local study and it's not just municipal boundaries, but we want to understand trade areas and we want to understand what's going on in territories and provinces. Why do we do this? Because target markets might be bypassing one place, one city, and going to other places within that same territory or province. And we want to understand where are they going, because that's part of developing cerebrally, strategically, the strategies for intercepting them. So we want to understand not only who's moving to Windsor, who's moving within, but who isn't moving to Windsor, who's moving to other places and other cities. Maybe they're going to Toronto even, and we want to figure out how do we become more competitive? What do we need to build to intercept some of those households? And then lots of site-specific projects I work on for private developers. So again, every study should include the primary province and the largest cities within that province before we hone in on a smaller local place. And so that's important because when you imagine, maybe going out and trying to find ways to fund a study, imagine that the study might actually be a larger geography than you imagine. So you might actually be collaborating with your neighbors, with other jurisdictions, or with the province on funding a study. So kind of broadening your mind in terms of where you might go to get resources to do a study like this. Also collaborating with anchor institutions. Major employers often will help fund a study, and even developers, who really want to get their hands on the data. And so let's talk about an example, a TMA approach. I've been rattling away about why and when to do a study. Let's kind of dive into some data, and I think some of this will start to make a little more sense. This was a study that I did in 2018 for the city of Flint in Michigan, and it was funded by Kettering University. So here's a really good example of a private entity that stepped forward and helped fund a study for the city of Flint. The city of Flint didn't pay for the study, the university did. So I first want to talk about the conventional approach. And this is important in kind of getting grounded in how is a target market analysis different than a conventional housing study. I think the first way to do that, the good place to start is let's understand what is the conventional approach, right? And I often do look at a lot of data that's included in conventional housing studies because it kind of gets us grounded. And, we do want to understand some existing conditions in the market. These are just two little snapshots. I'm going to show you a larger picture of this so that you can see the data. Basically, on the left-hand side, I'm showing household tenure, owners versus renters, in other words, and what their income brackets are. And then on the right-hand side, I'm showing the rent brackets on the top and owner brackets on the bottom. And basically a conventional approach would just overlay these two charts and just kind of look at them in the light and see if there's a mismatch. So usually there is a mismatch where perhaps households could afford to pay more if there was new product to choose from. So sometimes that's the case. Sometimes it's the inverse, where households may be overburdened by price compared to their income. So here's the household income, a little closer zoom in. This again was for the city of Flint. And I looked at the renters in dark blue and the owners in gray, and basically just looked at existing households by income bracket, and then comparing that with what on the top, what the actual contract rent brackets are and what the owner value brackets are. So we can kind of match them up. A household of a certain income should theoretically afford to pay a certain amount for a home. And mortgage lenders do this. They'll look at your income and figure out if you can afford the mortgage on the home that you want to buy. In the renter market, in the affordable housing industry, the standard has been to say that a renter shouldn't spend more than 30% of their income on monthly contract rent. That's usually higher in most places in reality. And we can do something similar on the owner as well. Typically 40% or 45% of an owner's income is spent paying on the mortgage. So that's one approach. A second approach is to look at what's currently available, what's currently on offer in a local market. So this is basically doing what I call a real estate analysis. What's currently available? So in this chart, if you bear with me for a minute, I want to get you grounded on the X and Y axis. So the X axis, the bottom here, maybe you can see my arrow. I've got the unit size in square feet. So one dot is one unit that's being marketed, advertised, like the Durant here. It's about 600 square foot unit. And if I take the rent, the advertised reported rent, and calculate that as a percent of the unit size. So basically I'm calculating the contract rent per square foot, and I let that be on the Y-axis. And then I take all the units and I just throw them onto this chart, and they create a scatter. And hopefully you can see the pattern. It's basically a ski slope. So way up here on my upper arrow, if there were any units that were 300 square feet, aside from this one, they might be way up here. But most of the units that are 1,400 square feet or more in space have a much lower rent per square foot. So the important thing here is to recognize, let me just summarize it. Small units can capture a higher rent per square foot than large units. And it's an inverse logarithmic mathematical relationship. We could throw a regression line on here, for example. But this is powerful data, and I almost always do it. And I did it here for Flint because I wanted to show the relationships between rent per square foot and unit size. So if a new developer were to come in and say, well, I want to build 1,200 square foot rental units, and I'm expecting to get $2 a square foot, I would say, I'm not sure that's what the market is, that's not quite the market reality, but perhaps you could get $1.40, or maybe if it's brand new and it's got great amenities, maybe $1.50. And can you make your analysis work that way? Oops. I lost my place. There we go. So another thing we'll do is just a study of existing, what's the precedent in building formats and scale and height. So do we have precedent examples of what's currently being on offer in the market? So if you have choices like this in a local market, maybe this isn't the missing middle. This is actually available and present in the market. Another thing we can do is look at building permit data, how many units have been approved, how many building permits have been approved over time. There's power in doing timeline series data because you can see the pre-recession surge in housing activity across all of, North America. And then we had this slide, the Great Recession is very evident, we just slumped. And we'll never get back to this because a lot of this was driven by lending practices that in the US at least are now illegal. So we're back to a more of a tempered situation. I should say more than tempered now because we actually have a housing shortage with a new crisis at hand. So this is just the number of units. We can also look at the average reported investment per unit. Of course, what developers report isn't always exactly what they're actually doing. So we look at timeline series data to look for a pattern, just a trend. And in general, we can see that attached units, the average investment has been hovering around $100,000 per unit. That's the average investment. Whereas among detached houses, it's double. So that's kind of an important thing, to point out for developers who are kind of used to just building houses, to help them understand that they could reduce their costs by half if they were to consider attached formats or something else instead. I think I'm pushing the button too fast. There we go. Sorry about the glitchy slides here. So most of you may have seen this kind of missing housing format chart. My friend Dan Perolik has actually designed and sketched this out to kind of highlight what do we mean by missing middle, everything from duplexes to live work units. And some of our panelists will talk a little bit more about that as well. So missing middle formats, I've just got a few examples here. I want to check my slides here. There's another example of, so in many communities in Michigan, at least, and across the United States, we have cities and towns and villages that really don't have any of these examples. And this could represent a missing product in those markets. If they're in Windsor, maybe they're not missing, but something else might be. So the target market analysis, sometimes I talk about urban places, and I often get this question, what defines an urban place? So I tend to lean on this urban transect a little bit. And I'd like to clarify that when we talk about urban places, we're not necessarily talking just about big cities like Toronto or medium cities like Windsor. An urban place can actually be a small place, a village or a hamlet or a township. And what I usually look for to define an urban place is there a downtown? Hopefully there's at least one historic building that's 2 stories. That would be nice. Is there some sort of a traditional street grid pattern in that community? Is there a sense of that the existing buildings and land uses feel compact, even if it's just in a 1 block area? And within that downtown and compact place with a street grid, is there also some sense of place, a sense of arrival? So some of our smallest townships and villages and hamlets, again, could absolutely be small urban places, or at least have a small urban place at the core, at the heart of the community. So I want to introduce now the target markets, and the data that I use, I actually purchase it from Experian. We call it a mosaic, just kind of think of it as kind of a patchwork quilt. There are other vendors out there that provide data, at least 3 other vendors. The ones, for example, Esri or ESRI provides, I think they have Tapestries, and then Claritas, which used to be Claritas Nielsen. They use prisms, and I will share with you that in Canada, the data that I researched and that I was able to find is predominantly the prism data. For the US, I've mostly been using mosaics. So if we were to do work in Canada, we can get data, but we'll have to shift to a different data set. But the data is powerful because we can take households and kind of cluster them into groups on whether they're affluent or poor, whether they're urban or rural. And so I'm going to continue because I've got more data I want to show you. So just kind of imagining, we want to understand what are the lifestyle preferences of singles and of families, diverse clusters. And I'm going to show you a little more data. There's 71 of them. I jumped ahead a little bit. There's actually 71 among the mosaics, and I'll show you those in a little more detail in a little bit. So I often get the question, how does Experian collect this data? They track a lot of consumer behavior data through mortgages, retail expenditures, and particularly credit card data. They also track life-changing events among our individual households. So a life-changing event might be a change of address, purchasing a new home or a car, renting a new apartment, having a new addition or a loss in the family, a change in marital status. They track all of that. And those are really important socioeconomic variables that impact the way that the clusters are shaped. And then they also look at census data, and I know you have census data as well. So, they will look at things like tenure, household income, housing units by value, vacancies, seasonality. That's all directly relevant to the housing market. So again, a big piece of this is consumer behavior in the retail and credit market. So they're tracking us as households. They're tracking our magazine subscriptions and credit card transactions and debt and how we handle debt. And Experian takes all of this data for households and individuals, and they're in the US anyway, they're required by the federal government, our federal government, to compress the data and collapse it down into block groups. So I cannot purchase data for any individuals or households. I wouldn't want to, it'd be too much data, but I can purchase the data. I can purchase the data for block groups and census tracts and cities, villages, hamlets, townships. I can delineate geographies. I can delineate polygons, do drive time data, and extract the data that way and get a profile of lifestyle clusters in any kind of geography that I want to define at a larger level, but just not individuals or addresses. So again, Experian takes all of that rich, deep data and catalogs it into 71 clusters. I know you can't read this, it's way too tiny. But basically, maybe you can if you get real close. Basically, number 1 is American royalty. Number 2 is platinum prosperity, kids and Cabernet, couples with clout, jet set urbanites. So they're really the richest of the rich, and they're listed 1 through 6. On the second page, because I couldn't fit 71 on one page, I went to the second page at the very bottom. They're basically urban survivors, tight money, and tough times, the poorest of the poor, and the households that really need help the most in finding affordable, attainable, quality place to live that is, that meets their needs, even their minimum needs, and hopefully improves their quality of life so that they can step up through their lifespan, step up and improve into the other clusters. This was a profile that I did, that I basically captured the data from Experian and reported it out into these, what I call infographics or just histograms, so that we could kind of see the data visually a little bit more. And where there's a 1, it's really just basically a 0. So this was the university core in Flint. Again, remember, the university paid for the study, so we're customizing this study to look at a polygon that focuses on the university core for Kettering University. And in that polygon that I delineated, there's actually 30 households that fit into suburban attainment, and 45 are settled and sensible. And remember, now these are the most affluent, so really not a lot of affluence. It's really very moderate in income. And in fact, the daring to dream, hope for tomorrow, urban survivors, they're among the most prevalent lifestyle clusters in this university core. And so these are aspiring to move up. The O group, very much urbanites. So I'm going to read these off because they're very important. When we have developers that want to build townhouses and condos, they tend to go after these groups: the digital dependents, urban ambition, colleges and cafes, driving singles. You get the idea. So in the interest of time, it's important, again, to always compare your geography to the next largest geography around you. If I did a study for Windsor, that would be Windsor. Oops. That would be Windsor. And then I'd want to look at Ontario as well and make sure that I understand the full picture, put the sheets side by side and really compare them. Another important part of this is migration. So again, we're not studying households that already live in Windsor. That would just be part of the story. We look at them, it's part of existing conditions, but we really want to understand who's on the move, who's actually migrating. These are movership rates. A movership rate is just the share of households that move in any given year. So usually younger households, younger residents have higher movership rates than mature adults. And also owners have lower movership rates than renters. So 30% of all renters move every year. That means that in any market, about every 3 years, your renters completely turn over. And that's really important to understand. We can also map the data. So this is just one group, the striving singles. Remember, they're the target market for lofts over street front retail and downtowns. And this is where they're living in Flint. So really, they're in the downtown area. We can really compare different lifestyle clusters and see which of them are inclined to go to an urban place, which would be more inclined to go to a rural place. We also can study their preferences in the housing market. I create these sheets. So for every lifestyle cluster, there's 20 pages of data that I could tap into. What I did is for the striving singles here, for example, I just pulled the data. How many are renters? What percent are renters? In this case, 96% of the striving singles are renters. And of those renters, 80% move every year. So although the average of renters is 30%, this group is twice as inclined to move. When they choose a place to live, they're very inclined to choose a high rise, a tower building. Here's a closer look. A high rise or a low rise, very few, in fact, none of them would choose a detached house. We can take this data and actually translate it into building formats. So this is something we did for Flint as we looked at step buildings that were created actually by Grayson Johnson, who's our moderator today. She did it on behalf of the Incremental Development Alliance, and we use these kind of step buildings. Thank you, Grayson, for that. Really helped me kind of convey visually what the magnitude of market potential is by building format. So I know that from each lifestyle cluster, if I know what they're looking for, I can translate that. And when I do the market potential, what do they actually want? I can take it a step further. For the 4 lease units, I can determine based on the incomes of the target markets, what their tolerance would be to pay various rent points, price points on contract rent. And of course, I can also do it on home values as well. So this becomes really powerful data. Next steps after you have a study, do public workshops or public open events, study group sessions, roundtable discussions, have a dialogue, keep things going. Invite developers, the investment community in for a special event that's focused for them. It's hard sometimes, I know, to get developers to talk and open up, but when we put them into a room full of their peers with a cash bar, for some reason they talk and they start to share. Post the study online where people can find it, send it by email. Every time a developer, a broker, a lender, anyone reaches out to the community, share it, send them an email back with a note saying, hey, by the way, take a look at this TMA we did. Meeting one-on-one with lenders, working internally with planning staff and commissioners and other consultants. Do an update every 5 to 10 years, depending if there's not a lot of movement in the market and things are very stable, then the data is usually good for at least 5 years. But if there's significant economic events, pandemics, housing crashes, things like that, then that's a good time to do an update. This is close to my last slide. What do we need to do if we were to do this kind of work in Canada? First of all, we really want to understand, again, think about the geography question I threw at you in terms of making sure we're looking at a local place as well as a regional comparison so that we have a sense of scale, a sense of relativity. we don't want to get too myopic and just look at one geography, because then we don't really know, do we have highs or lows? And are households migrating to other places and bypassing us? We really need to understand that as well. Thinking through your study goals and objectives, and thinking through, what is your hypothesis? What do you expect the study to say? And maybe sometimes I find real surprises in the data. It's a good question after the study is to say, what's the biggest surprise? What did you learn? What did you not expect? And I even will suggest that you try to create a list of 5 most pressing questions or hypotheses, you know, to see if you can actually compose and document what are your top 5 questions. Identify your target audience and figure out what level and format of stakeholder engagement you would like. Things like public open houses, committee meetings, lectures like this, these are all things that can impact your budget and impact the cost of the study, but they can also enhance and be of a huge value to the study as well. If you engage stakeholders at the beginning, they're more likely to feel like it's their study and have a sense of ownership, and then they're more likely to use it. We need to figure out if there's some missing census variables. The Canadian census, for example, income by household tenure, home values, rents, vacancy data, that's all stuff I would need to dive into that and try to unfurl. Is there anything missing that I really need? And is there an alternative source that I could use? We also want to figure out what are the movership rates locally. Usually, I know that there's data there in Canada, because if we know how many households have lived in their current home for less than 1 year, I can take that data and calculate the movership rate. And then again, the last piece, I alluded to this before, we won't be able to use mosaics in Canada. We will have to use prison tapestries. Here's my contact information again, one more time. And we're going to go into a panel discussion. Again, our panelists here, and they'll have a chance to introduce themselves as well. So we have Rino, Tom, Dorian, and Justin. And I'm going to, that is my last slide. So I'm going to try to get back home here and stop share. And Grayson and Annika will hopefully guide me through any Q&A. Grayson?
Perfect. Thank you, Sharon. Actually, I'm going to jump in for a little bit here, and then I'll turn the floor over to Grayson after the short break. Thank you so much for this. This is it's really mind-bending stuff, and incredible to hear. To have it laid out in such a systematic way is really such a gift. Thank you. There are a couple of questions in the Q&A, and I'll just remind folks that you can put your questions in the Q&A there, and also comments if you have anything, just reflections on what you're hearing and how that might relate to the work that you're doing. I want to note that we actually have representatives, both elected and planning staff and other municipal staff as well, from several municipalities in our region and across Ontario, and actually outside of the province as well, who are with us today. So that's great to see, and happy to hear your comments about how this relates to the work that's happening in your own municipalities. So let me go to the first question here, and this is from Diane Dyson, long a friend of the Centre for Cities as well, and currently with Daily Bread in Toronto. And she asks, does the market drive developers to build smaller units because they're more profitable per square foot?
I wish they did. A big part of the work that I do, lectures like this and the TMAs, are to educate developers to not do that. So most developers that I work with don't understand that dynamic. Most of them think that they need to build larger houses to supersize, I call supersize the units, so that they can get higher prices because they need the higher price to offset their cost. So I wish that is our hope, that through education, we're going to eventually train an army of developers who get it and will actually start to do that.
Thank you. And maybe I'll just stick with Diane too, since she got her questions in there first. Diane's second question is, what is a useful balance needed in a TMA between supply side data and demand driven data?
So supply and demand, I need both. And that is the conventional approach, is to look at supply and demand, and it's a 50-50 balance. And that usually represents half of the study. So demand data ends up, if I take the complete study, including the TMA is half, supply and demand is the other half, and that's split evenly.
Thank you. And I'll go to one more question, and I see a couple of things coming up in the chat as well that goes to hosts and panelists. If you can throw your questions into the Q&A as well, that's great. This one is from Fraser Fathers, who of course is in Windsor. Given the globalization and commodification of the housing market, is TMA losing its value as you can't actually capture all of the potential target for the housing market in your analysis? In the Windsor case, external investment from outside the community has driven our market, whereas local income levels would likely constrain local investment. So who's the target? External people moving into the community, dispersing local community members, or local residents facing a housing crisis? Excellent question. Thank you.
Yep, that's a really good question, and I'm glad you asked that. It's both, of course, right? There are studies that I've done for communities where there really is significant import from outside the country. So we can get at that data actually to determine among existing households, what percent are foreign born, where are they migrating from, what is their primary language spoken at home. That's the kind of data that we can tap into a little bit. I'm not sure if Canada has that data. I've been able to find it through the Internal Revenue Service here in the United States. The IRS tracks any household, any person that files a tax form, that files their taxes at the end of the year. Hopefully we're all doing it. But you actually have to fill out on the form, was this your primary residence last year? And if not, where did you live last year? And the IRS actually packages and provides that data to us. So tricky data to get, but if in some markets that really you're seeing a prevalence of that kind of global investment and in migration, then there are ways to try to study it. It's just tricky. It is tough, but we can do it.
Thank you. And Fraser, if there's any follow-up to that, feel free to throw that in the Q&A as well. And we'll go next to a question from Sarah Sivkar. And I'll just mention that both Sarah and Fraser are leads on the CMHC funded ADU data project that has been running for several months in Windsor, Essex. We've been happy to support in a very small way, but they've done some really excellent work there. And I see Grayson applauding that one as well. So welcome to both of you. Sarah's question is, how does the TMA address lack of affordable units in our community? In an age of financialized housing, it's overly simplistic to suggest an increase in correct housing supply will solve affordability. This seems to not address the lower end of the demographic spectrum, despite including them in the data, because new builds are more expensive to build, and which is why we don't often end up with luxury units. I'm curious if there's a way for TMA to account for that.
Yes, it is. It absolutely is a challenge that when we do the study, we look at all price brackets, and inevitably in every market, there's an affordability challenge. And there's a challenge with getting developers to build small units to address that affordability. And like the tough times, households, the poorest of the poor, even if you build tiny houses or micro lofts or accessory dwelling units, it's still really, they need assistance often just to get into brand new units. Inevitably, most of them end up settling for what is vacated when other households gobble up the new product. So usually there's a little bit of a slide or a shift that happens in the market. There's going to be a spectrum of households that just have their pocketbook is just sufficient that they can actually manage to purchase or rent the smallest, tiniest new unit. And then the poorest of the poor end up having to settle for what is left behind. So that is a dynamic. It's not fair, but it is something that we definitely see in the data. The only way that I can continue to account for it in the market analysis is to continue showing the data and continue keeping the dialogue open about ADUs and tiny houses in the right places and in the right context, and micro lofts, keeping in mind that that's not necessarily, hopefully we don't end up there, right? Hopefully we don't end there through our entire lives, hopefully that's a stepping stone up to improving our quality of life through our lifespan. So hopefully we don't, hopefully we're helping families step up through their lifespan.
Thank you. And next, a question from Raymond Home, who asks, how would TMA address pushback from people who, for lack of a better word, just don't want more people in their neighborhoods?
That's a really good one. Not in my backyard, right? Really, this becomes a policy, challenge and a stakeholder engagement challenge, educational challenge. There's always going to be NIMBYs in every community. Again, the best that we can do is show the data and demonstrate the depth of the market potential and work with developers. In the US, I'm sure there are too. We often have discussions about gentrification and the fear of gentrification, and neighborhoods who actually say, we don't want that here because we don't want to be pushed out. We want to be able to afford our neighborhood. So handling those, it does have to be handled fairly and diplomatically and carefully and gently, and that's done through stakeholder engagement.
Thank you for that. I'll just make a last call for any questions to Sharon. Again, we will have another Q&A once we bring in our discussants after the break, so you will have a chance to bring in any questions there. But if there's anything else from a sort of clarifying nature, that would be great to hear. I guess maybe on that last question, Sharon, I'd be sort of curious to know to what extent the TMA itself, I mean, I know we're getting into the weeds a little bit, as we keep saying, on housing and housing policy. And while there are a lot of people, I think, across the country interested in having those conversations on a more surface level and sort of understanding that there is a crisis, the sort of getting into the technical aspects of solutions might, is not something that everyone is sort of super engaged with at the moment. To what extent have you seen examples of something like a TMA being useful in kind of culture change more broadly within a community? And maybe that goes a little bit to Raymond's question as well. In your experience in the communities that you've worked in, or municipalities you've worked for, local governments, has that been part of the kind of changing the culture, or is there good examples there?
Yeah, absolutely. The most recent example where I worked on that was in Hamtramck, which is a small community wrapped, surrounded by Detroit, and very, very racially and ethnically diverse, with lots of in-migration. So again, we looked at data like, how many households are foreign-born, what's their country of origin, what's their language spoken at home, and really looked at time series data to demonstrate that some in-migration groups were gaining ground while others were losing. So I really tried to have that data in front of the client and the leadership team to help them understand that as diverse as they believed they were at the risk of losing diversity. Just because some groups could, just tend to take over others, and other groups just tend to out-migrate. And making sure that we're being aware of those trends, I think, is a good place to start. I will share that a lot of questions that I get are policy related questions. And I really try hard to stay away too much from making policy statements in my work, because, for example, in Michigan, some communities have come to me and said, well, our hypothesis is that we have a dire need for affordable housing, and we feel we really need it. And this is what we believe, and we expect your study to tell us that. And I've had this other communities 50 miles away say, we don't need affordable housing. We're great the way we are. Developers are building brand new lofts. They're getting gobbled up and we're happy, and we don't need, tell us what the market rate potential is. So I could get into danger zone by telling each community what their policies ought to be. This is something that needs to be vetted. It needs to be unraveled at your local level by your leadership team. I also have Justin Sprague here. He's one of the panelists. He's a good friend of mine. We work together a lot, and he works on what I call housing strategic plans. A strategic plan is designed to identify what sort of obstacles or challenges, everything from policy to master plans to zoning ordinances, or using different vehicles for funding mechanisms. He tries to address all of those things at a local level and try to unravel some of that and unpack it a little bit more than I can do. I'm a market analyst. My job is to focus on what is the market potential, how deep, how fast, what price point, for who, and what format.
Thank you so much. I see questions are pouring in. So what I'm going to suggest is we'll take one more question now. We'll break, come back just after 12:30, and then I will keep the questions on the screen here, obviously, and we can come back to some of those and bring in our panelists after the roundtable discussion. So I'll go to Fiona Coughlin from Habitat for Humanity, Windsor, Essex, who asks, we might be serving a specific group, but at Habitat for Humanity, we're working with very large families with 4 to 6 children currently living in 1 or 2 room apartments. Have you seen positive results from TMA in addressing this group?
Yes, so this is also, you know, in that same discussion categories like multi-generational families as well. So that gets a lot of attention in the US. Is just, you know, we've got, not only do we have 4 children, but we also have grandma and our sister and her fiance, you know, all living with us. So those households definitely show up among the 71 lifestyle clusters. So again, by looking at all 70 clusters, we can usually unravel that. And absolutely, they're looking for attainably priced detached houses usually, or sometimes a townhouse, or even a duplex where they can, imagine developers building houses that have cottages in the backyard, or imagine a large house that is actually 2 levels, you know, stacked one above the other. You could have the owner on the street front, on the street level, and they could actually sublet the upper level to a family member, or just find a way to, you know, just kind of expand the footprint for a larger family, and at the same time generate rental income.
Thank you so much. I'm going to go to Allison's story for the last question, because I think it's actually a really great sort of contextualizing one to finish on for this first half, and then we'll take our break. Allison's question is, in your data analysis, can TMAs be used, or can they be useful for smaller communities? Meaning, are there any data samples that are too small to measure? Appreciating Sharon's recommendation for both local and regional studies. When your communities are 40,000, 10,000, or 5,000 populations or less, how can we measure this?
So 10,000 is not too small. The smallest, I'm doing a study in a county right now where we're looking at all 30 places within the county. It happens to be Lenawee County. I know Jim Tischler knows where this is. Lenawee County, Jim, they want us to do the study for all 30 places. And some of these townships have 500 people. The data is almost getting too small at that point. But if I have 1,000 people, I can still run the model.
Thank you. And I'll actually close out just with a comment from Jim, who is on our organizing group and has helped bring this group together. So thank you again, Jim, for all your help. Jim says TMAs can be an asset to identify those lower income households building type interests, so that the government can surgically provide subsidy incentives to produce those units. So just coming back to the conversation we had before about the lower end of the housing market. Sharon, I don't know if you wanted to respond to any of that or to that comment.
No, that's spot on. It's good. Thanks, Jim.
Perfect. Okay, in that case, then we are 12:29. I'm going to suggest that we break for 5 minutes, have a chance to stretch your legs. We'll regroup and bring in our panel. And again, keep the questions coming. I see people have been moving into the room as we've carried on. We hope we'll keep you all with us through the second hour. We are recording today, so for those who didn't have the full 2 hours to be with us, we'll make sure that all of you as participants have access. We'll email out to you the recording. I know some of you had colleagues as well who wanted to have a chance to hear it. Sharon, thank you so much for this, and we'll see you all back in 5 minutes. Okay, welcome back, everyone. I hope you had a chance to stretch your legs, and thrilled to have you all with us again. Again, my name is Annika Smith, Director of the Windsor Law Center for Cities, and I'm here with Sharon Woods from Land Use USA. Thanks again to Sharon for leading us through our first hour. And I'm thrilled now to be able to bring in the rest of the team for today. Grayson Johnson as our moderator, who is Senior Specialist Innovation and Research with the CMHC, Canada Mortgage and Housing Corporation. Rino Bortolin, Councillor and Chair of the Planning and Heritage Committee for the City of Windsor. Tom Fehrenbach, Director of Planning, Building and Development, City of East Lansing. Dorian Moore, Vice President and Architect of Archive DS. And Justin Sprague, Vice President, Community Image Builders or CIB Planning. Thank you so much to all of you. I'm going to turn the floor over to Grayson in just a moment. She will lead a moderated discussion, pulling out from Sharon's presentation and bringing in the variety of perspectives that all of our panelists have with TMA or with the need for TMA in their own work environments. And then again, there will be question and answer time at the end. Do feel free to continue putting your Q&As up for consideration as we go. And I'll just note that Princess has also put everyone's, all the panelists' bios into the chat, so you can take a look there and have a sense of who you're hearing from and the experience that they're bringing. So thanks again, everyone. Thank you to Grayson, and I'll turn the floor over to you.
Thank you, Annika, and thank you everyone for having me back here. It's great to be back with the Center for Cities. I am so excited about this discussion. I love learning from Sharon. I've had the pleasure of hearing her present on this a few times, and there's always something new to get out of it. And so I wanted to start off with almost a philosophical question, and I'm reflecting on the fact that Rino and Dorian both have actually retail entrepreneurship experience. And in the world of understanding demand, I think a lot of us have an intuitive sense for what our neighborhoods need. It wouldn't be a surprise to anyone to think, that a grocery clerk probably wants a small apartment close to where they work. And we also are recognizing that there are all these different housing types that we inherited from years ago, decades ago, when they didn't have the demand analysis. They didn't have that sort of thing. And so I'm interested to hear from Sharon first, and maybe some others weighing in on if this is kind of an intuitive thing that we can understand about our communities when we're local, why isn't that translating into what's getting developed? Like, where is the disconnect that happened over the years where we're no longer building these things and they've become missing in the first place?
Yeah, I think there's a big disconnect in the way that we've started regulating our cities and regulating places. So I think a lot of it gets coded right into our zoning ordinances, where if you start to unpack some zoning ordinances and do what we call a stress test, you could find that that there are barriers even to building what target markets would want, or to build missing middle housing anymore. How did we, I think there was a time too when corporations and employers were just, grabbing cheap land at the fringes of our cities, and workers just kind of followed where the jobs were. And we didn't think as much about the cost of just paving concrete and asphalt to build roads to get out to these suburban sprawling places. And I think now it's almost like we had to go through that painful journey in order to look back now and go, oh my gosh, what have we done? We have to get back to our urban core, to the heart of our communities. So I don't want to steal the show here. Panelists, Dorian, what do you think?
Well, I think one of the things that we need to consider is that culturally in North America, we've been conditioned to want more space for more stuff, to put it bluntly. And I think that's part of the problem. Part of it, yes, is zoning. I totally agree with that. But part of it is that we've been conditioned to think that the single family house is the ultimate. And the bigger that dwelling is, the better off you are. And I think it's going to take zoning changes and cultural shifts in order for us to reach a point where that's not the case. And we're seeing it happening. And I think that to tie this back to the target market analysis, one of the things that shows is that there is a demand for some of these other types of housing and other types of living. So I think that's something that we have to consider also.
Sure, and I'd like to weigh in on that as well. from a policy perspective, development, the new construction development is always what a lot of communities are looking for. Why is not any investment occurring in our community? And we sort of see, our philosophy is that development is more of an ecosystem, and that target market analysis is the starting point. That gives us the market perspective. It gives us that snapshot of what the market is. And then from a policy standpoint, there has to be an alignment because, again, as Sharon noted, the types of housing that we're looking for or that the target market analysis is saying is in demand, our policies currently do not allow that, whether it's our master plans, our zoning ordinances, and I can say specifically here in America, zoning has been one of the #1 tools of segregation, whether it be racially, economically, or other form of segregation, and separating our communities into affordability levels. And so zoning policy analysis is always the next step in my mind after the TMA to say, yes, it's one thing for us to say we want to address affordability in our community, but it's another thing if we're going to go to the next level and change our policies to do that. And I think there needs to be some definition around affordable. One of the things that I like to look at is, we talk a lot about missing middle housing. And I like to separate that from also middle income housing, which is typically the most in demand in our region right now, is that price point in American dollars, a housing unit somewhere for purchase between $150,000 and $220,000. And that's not on the market right now. You cannot find it right now. So it's really important that we look at the policy and understand, is our ecosystem imbalanced, and can we align our policies in a manner that will allow us to achieve the development potential as identified in the market analysis.
Thank you, Justin. I'd love to go there. And Rino, I'm going straight to you with this one. I'm going to cue you up, okay? We're starting to see a lot of different layers of policy, at least at the high level, that are favoring intensification. And in fact, you can look across Canada, and many, many cities and provinces and the national level have all sort of spoken about this need for compact communities or sustainable development. And I would love to hear Rino tell his story about how that has been interpreted differently based on what the data is. So if we are seeing this shift towards intensification, what changed? What changed in terms of what we're hearing from the data, what we're hearing from the demand, or maybe what Dorian was saying about a difference in our cultural preferences? Rino.
So it goes a couple of different things, and start with the context of something that we don't actually talk much about is municipal finance and the collective can we afford things like continued sprawl, continued greenfield development. And one of the things that's actually finally been a spotlight for a lot of municipalities is the actual cost of sprawl. And Ottawa did a study, I believe last year, Halifax has done a study, and we've seen that traditional suburban developments with large lots, even though the value of the homes may be 4 or 5 times as much as core homes, end up costing a net, they end up being a net negative, and I believe it's somewhere around $3,000 to $4,000 that those homes cost to service as a community, versus homes in core neighborhoods and densely populated neighborhoods that actually yield somewhere around $1,600 to $1,800 per household into the tax coffers. So it's a very unique perspective to see that core dense neighborhoods are actually subsidizing the sprawl greenfield developments that we have. And what's interesting about that specifically in Windsor is that traditionally housing was cheap in Windsor. So we continue to sprawl out. You've always heard people say that, people want that, raised ranch on a greenfield site, because that's what we were doing. And the status quo promotes the status quo. The people who could not afford it were living in apartments, living in the city. And what we actually have is a system that actually sets it up for the dense populations, like apartment dwellers, to be subsidizing people living in greenfield areas. So the lower income, poor neighborhoods who actually pay more rent, 2 times the tax rate, or more tax, I should say, 2 times the tax rate of a regular home, are actually subsidizing it on multiple levels, that continued sprawl. We are finally recognizing that and seeing that municipalities across the province have huge infrastructure deficits, because we may have development charges that pay for the infrastructure when it's created, but we have nothing for the replacement costs as years go by. And so I think we're finally starting to see that. And one of the things that was highlighted for me, and it was just last night at committee, we dealt with a report that was going to have proposed changes to our official plan and bylaw amendments, where we changed a lot of zoning amendments. It was a great report. We took a lot of great steps that encouraged intensification, encouraged density. But what piqued my attention was the fact that the consultant that did this report was the same exact consultant that came before council for a different matter, that it wasn't a city report, it was an outside report, but it created a justification to open up farmland for development parts of the city. And in 2018, his conclusion was that Windsor did not have enough space and the ability to take on the density to accommodate the growth. Hence, we needed to open up the farmland and the green space. 4 years later, he's before us telling us that Windsor should focus on density and intensification, and we have room for tens of thousands of units. And when we asked what changed, basically all he could say is that people were now forced into things like apartments and condos. So when the market forcibly brought people there, that's when we started changing, and that's when we started moving. So the difficult thing for me to swallow is the fact that we don't have a true picture of the data. We don't have real data. And to some of the comments, Fraser mentioned the commodification. Sarah mentioned the things like affordable housing. There are numerous things that these inform. Transit-oriented development. What kind of patterns are we having? People now with the huge increase in gas prices, people can't afford to drive 40 minutes into work, or would choose to live to work closer. Cities can't afford to keep sprawling out, and so we can't continue to have those patterns of development. So we're seeing a renewed effort on where and what type of development we should do, but we don't have the right data. And there was one slide specifically, Sharon, that you mentioned something where people interested, I think you use singles, young singles were not interested in single detached home and only interested in condos. That conversation is not what we're having here. We have a huge investment coming with an LG battery plant. We're going to expect thousands of people to move here. What type of housing do those people want? What types of people are moving here? Are they families? Are they singles? We're not having the proper conversation, because literally when we ask the consultant, they take historical permits that are from the building department, historic sales, and then growth trends. So when we asked, for example, if you go to a city and you do this predictive modeling and they've never built a condo before, you're telling me that you would never show a need for a condo. And he said yes. And so it's deflating, because we need the real data, because that data will help inform how we approach and how we target through policies, things like affordable housing, how we target things like transit-oriented development, and how we target things like development charges and proper growth. And so it's very exciting for me on all of those, because from a municipal finance perspective, this is the core data that we need to start making informed decisions across the board.
Sharon, I see you unmuted. Did you have something you wanted to share?
Oh, no, nope. I'm enjoying everything that Rino said. Thank you. Yes, he's basically saying we need the data. He's basically saying we need Sharon. So thank you, Rino.
But I think it would be important to add to that, though. I think there is a special place for education on this, especially around not only the economics of housing, but the drivers of the policy. When you look back at the last major housing boom in America around mid-90s, that was the time when we saw a lot of baby boomers finally getting into their space of wealth and started that real large lot estate style trend. We want 1 acre, 2 acres, 3 acres. 2,000, 3,000 square foot home, the McMansions as some call them. And when we look at today, those individuals that lived that are the individuals that are serving on our city councils and our planning commissions and still see that as the ideal housing scenario for their community. And so that really just highlights even more the importance of the data to be able to show them that demographic change and that shift in Americans and Canadians' housing preferences to be able to drive that policy discussion. But it is largely a difficult conversation, and it has to revolve around the economics of the community, not just the municipal finance and infrastructure and sustainability of our communities, but also to show them that, going back to sort of the NIMBYism that we discussed earlier, to show them that having alternative types of housing in our community or increasing density in our community isn't going to create the economic impact that is most feared, and that's that our property values are going to decline and we're going to lose our investment in our housing. There is an economic case for diversity and people and in housing, and I think that's another difficult conversation that we have to have, driven by the results of the market analysis.
I agree, Justin. I think it kind of goes back to what Rino is suggesting in terms of kind of the true overall costs and measuring those impacts and the effects of the impacts when you do build the sort of more dense products near services.
Tom, I'd love you to expand on that and get into this idea of, now that cities are kind of coming around to understanding the cost of sprawl, the cost of developing a particular way, there is a lot of pressure in some areas to completely kind of leapfrog this idea of the middle housing and to go straight to much, much bigger buildings. And for the same sort of things, saying like there's a housing crisis, the payback for the city is much greater for this. You're on the front lines of trying to deal with, like, how do we actually enshrine this in our code? So how are you walking that line? I don't know what the discussion of that is in East Lansing. I know that it would be very, there's a lot of pressure in a lot of Canadian cities, but I would love for you to comment on how to calibrate your code to actually address the target market analysis that you're seeing.
Wow, do you have a couple more hours? So I guess just to explain East Lansing a little bit, we are a Big 10 college town. We have 50,000 students that come in here, and all kinds of positive and negative externalities that come with that. But certainly a large demand, especially from private equity as of late, to build dense high-rise apartments. So some of the initial things that we did, really after a 20-year conversation about where density makes sense and if it makes sense, and a lot of big community conversations, hundreds and hundreds of conversations, where we did change our master plan and ultimately our zoning. Some of the things that we incorporated into the zoning really were attempts to add diversification of housing along with what we knew the market wanted to build. So one instance is that if you're going to build multifamily in our B3, our city center zoning district, it has to be designed to really more than just a student type of demand, so that if and when we have other types of demand in our downtown specifically, that those folks won't be turned off by the type of design that these apartments have. Another is, if you're going to build this product, 25% of the units must be diversified housing, which we really identify as low to moderate income, 80% or lower of our AMI, owner occupied units, or units that cater to those that are 55 and over. And that's been an interesting experiment. I think there's been some success with that, and definitely some lessons learned. We're going to continue looking at that part of our ordinance to see if it should be tweaked, and if it's been successful, et cetera. I think from a TMA perspective, what it really taught us, and I think, we use the TMA as a jumping off place for multiple conversations with our community. We used our housing and planning commissions and actually had a joint meeting of them along the way to really help them to understand, how the dynamics work here and where are the opportunities for us. And then we actually worked with Sharon, and we worked also with Justin along the way, and we had to kind of retool it because we did it right in the middle of COVID. So we kind of pivoted a little bit on how we formatted that. But ultimately, our goal right from the beginning, even when we structured the RFP looking for Sharon and Justin, we really wanted a document that we could implement. And that's where getting into the strategic planning aspects of it. And then for us, the granular near-term action planning that we derived from that strategic plan really guided us on these are the things we need to do to operationalize what we've learned in the TMA. So right now we have 7 things queued up. We're working through 2 major ones right now. One is, looking at our master plan really specifically from a housing lens and looking at how we can be more of an attainable community and more of an affordable community, and what are the things we can do from a policy standpoint to really get the market to provide those is really, I think, one of the things that we're working hard on in a broad area of our city. The other is really looking at additional form-based code type implementations in kind of the rest of our downtown to say, how can we add some additional density, use bonuses for things like setbacks and heights, and also, again, overlay some of the attainability and affordability aspects. So I could talk for a long time, but I'll leave it at that for now.
Thank you so much. And I would love to hear Dorian's comments on that as well, because Dorian, I know that you are involved in actually designing these buildings, and you've been involved in charrettes where you're hearing from people on the ground and you're getting sort of straight from the horse's mouth what people are interested in, what they like, what makes one building different than another. Why is it different living in a walk-up versus a duplex? So you're experiencing all of that, and I would love to know if you are finding that kind of qualitative data that you're getting working directly with people that are living in these units or that are looking at their neighborhood and thinking, hey, what's missing here? How that ends up translating into what the city does.
That's a good question. And one of the things that I think we need as a starting point is to understand, the slide that Sharon had that dealt with missing middle housing. And one of my concerns going into charrettes and some of these workshops is that the term missing middle is on the verge of becoming somewhat of a buzzword. And it's starting to mean whatever kind of housing someone wants that's smaller than a skyscraper. And I think I always encourage people to take a look at that diagram, and there's a very narrow range of what is actually considered missing middle housing. It's basically, 2.5 to 3 stories max in a house-like form so that it can fit within our neighborhoods. And the reason for that is so that it becomes more acceptable to people within a community. When you start getting into 5, 7, 10-story buildings, those aren't missing middle examples. Those are definitely needed in some cities, and we're seeing a lot of those in Windsor, not so much the missing middle. So that's kind of the starting point. But what I've also found is that during charrettes, if you show people examples, like the examples that Sharon showed of that type of housing, they get it. When you talk about density, they don't necessarily get it. But we still need to have that conversation about density, because we're going to want missing middle, but we also want some of what I call the medium scale, medium density buildings. Those 5, 7, 8-story buildings also need to be part of the mix. And so what I always say is that the data doesn't come from the charrette or the workshop. The data, especially the stuff that Sharon provides, provides the justification for the housing typologies that are proposed and quite often accepted once people can take that data and put a face to it or an image to it. I think that's the key.
Yeah, I'd
So
like to
you're-
oops, I'm sorry.
Go ahead, Sharon.
Oh, I'll be really quick on density. Whenever I talk about density, I always use the words in combination with saying the conservation of public open space, the public realm. So even if a developer does try to squeeze out a higher density on the missing middle, as Dorian so aptly described, it's there has to be a courtyard. There has to be a common green. There has to be, maybe it's across from a park or a town square or something. It's dangerous to talk about density without talking about the public realm.
Thanks. And I want to bring it back to Justin, and then I'm going to start incorporating some of these audience questions into the discussion for the last 30 minutes here. So Justin, we've heard about the sort of public policy goals in creating more of this kind of housing. We've heard about the public desire and how, a lot of people actually really, really like this stuff. It's quite charming. It can be, courtyards and preserving the public realm like Sharon's talking about. What happens if it's not an economical option for a developer? What happens if it just doesn't make sense to build a building that is that small for them? I know that you work in this world, so bring us into that perspective.
Yeah. So there's a number of opportunities. One, a lot of communities, when they think of a developer, they're looking for a large developer. They completely skip the small scale marketplace. Those individuals, like the Habitat for Humanities or other CDFI groups or small entities that are willing to take on 1, 2, 3 units at a time at the smaller budget where they might make more sense. Part of the ecosystem is also understanding not just policy, but the financing. What's the source of the financing? Where's it coming from? And where are the gaps and challenges to that? And then looking at tools that may exist to help with that. And a case in point here, we can utilize tax increment finance as a means to help cover costs in development. And we can also look at partnering, doing like municipal private public partnerships public-private partnerships where there are cost savings that can be achieved to a developer by working with a municipality on municipal owned land that might be a little bit less costly to that developer rather than going out and buying land on the open market. And we can typically do it in a lot of our urbanized communities as a source of infill development. And so looking at those lots where there may have been foreclosures or demolitions or older housing stock that is no longer working for the community, that the municipality acquires in one way, shape, or form, and then to partner with that municipality to use those sites as investment sites and partner with smaller scale developers to help with those costs. Because a lot of the larger developers, they will not, if they can't get the appropriate density, the appropriate size to meet their margin goals, they won't look at it. And the last piece I would say around that is when a community makes an ask to a developer to partner, it's really important that the community understands the full picture. So have the data within the TMA, understand what financial tools are available from the municipal side, whether it's some sort of incentive or lower reduced cost land or another tool, and then create the vision. So understand what they want, what's the ask for the site before reaching out to the developer, because a lot of developers are inundated with asks and they're inundated with unclear asks. So those communities or organizations, those that have the full understanding of the system, here's what we want, here's what the market will support, here's where the policy allows it, and here's where the financing can work. Now you have a conversation to engage the developer with.
Fantastic. There's a number of questions and comments here that are feeding off of what you're saying, and I love it. Rino wanted to jump in here.
Yeah, I just coupling off of both what Dorian and Justin mentioned is that, municipalities do a poor job of actually leading on the front of development. And it's a very passive approach, or at least here in Ontario and Canada, as far as municipalities wait, developers bring proposals to them, they either approve or not approve and move on and almost have no say in it. We try to use incentives as incentives to get the outcomes that we want, but they're very passive incentives and they sit on the shelf until somebody wants to do the project and it fits the project that they fit. We need to take a more active role and really tie it to economic development and economic sustainability of the municipality. If we looked at it in that way, in the same way that we take an active role in building infrastructure like sewers and roads, how we develop is as important to the municipality as the key infrastructure is. And so, you know, you talked about density. When politicians talk about density, it's usually in a negative way. They're usually giving images. You see this image of Hong Kong, and it's just like this crazy high impact density. We're talking about doing gentle density. And a perfect example, Montreal has some of the highest density neighborhoods in North America without going above 3-4 stories. And so, and it's one of the most beloved cities in all of North America as far as livability, neighborhood amenities, and how connected it is with its neighborhoods. We don't have to fear density. We don't have to fear these large projects. We should be involved with them to get the outcomes that are not just good for that developer, but for the outcomes of the entire community. At some point, even though the land is owned by the developer, the way that those developments interact with your municipality, and as they become part of the tax base, the community is what supports that development through subsidies and taxes or through the way the tax system works. And so we should, as municipalities, be on the forefront asking for charrettes, doing charrettes of neighborhoods, going to developers saying, you have land in this neighborhood, this is what the community wants. Instead, we react. We have people coming to the planning committees. I can tell you right now, it's about shade, it's about parking, it's about traffic, it's about all the things, and you can hit repeat, and the same sort of NIMBY playbook will play across every development in North America, because municipalities don't take a lead role in saying, look at what we could build and look how we should build. If we do that, we could actually get the city we want, contributing the tax dollars we want, so we could afford things better. You don't walk into a car dealership and wait to be sold a car, and all of a sudden you leave spending $50,000 and you can't afford the car payment of $1,000 a month. You walk in there and you say, I have $200 a month. I want this. This is important to me. I want safety, reliability, whatever. You get it. We don't do that even as a municipality in working with our own developers and our own investors. And so we need to tie it more to economic development and economic sustainability of the community and sustainability of what we want from an outcome perspective in developing the neighborhoods we want.
That's a great point. And I think the work that we're trying to do, really to use the TMA to say, what does the market want? And then use that to drive the conversation of what does the community want? And if we, because you know, we hear from developers all the time, like, just tell us what you want, and you know, if it makes sense, we'll build it. And that's kind of a foreign principle to you know, planning departments and commissions, but it is really what we're trying to get to drive the conversation of what the community wants from that level, as opposed to reacting to the individual projects and talking about the shade and the traffic and really all of the ugly parts of humanity that come out every time, you know, one of these projects gets. But I think our theory is that by focusing on really being proactive about it and having those conversations up front and having that community engagement up front, when it comes time for the decision makers to approve the project, we'll be able to say, this is aligned with the direction the community has been wanting to go. It's hitting the market needs, it's hitting our community needs, it's helping us be the community that we want to be in the future as outlined in our policy documents, and you should approve it.
Tom, that's kind of hitting on a couple of our questions here from our questions and comments from Anam and Chris. So Anam's asking, besides the numbers, what are you also taking into consideration when you're speaking to the neighbors and hearing what they're needing? So are you, how are you blending the market demand with what would come out of something like a charrette that Dorian would be running?
Well, I'll let you know in 6 to 12 months. We're right in the thick of it right now. I'm developing an RFP for a 27-acre city-owned parcel that is currently was envisioned for for commercial only, and that conversation has changed. The community has had a number of conversations, and they want us to begin marketing that through a housing lens, and incorporating the types of design and unit mix and price points that we want to see. And I think where we're going to be positioning it is saying, hey, we'll work on the price if you can give us as much of the types of products that we want to see to hit our community's desires as possible. And so, I think within the next 6 or 12 months, I'll be able to answer that question as to whether we've been successful or not. I think there's a lot of hope that we will be.
And we have a couple other questions here or comments around the community that would be in a place but isn't able to find what they're looking for right now, and incorporating sort of that would-be community or people that would love to live in a neighborhood but they can't because they don't have a car, or the reverse, they would like to live in a place where they don't have a car. And so Sharon, I'd love you to comment on that as well. We've got a question from Greg here and a comment from Chris, but Greg's asking, how do we untangle that causality between housing and migration? So if there are people that would love to move to a location, but they can't because of lack of choice or finances, how are you incorporating that in your modeling?
So the way to do it is with the study of geography. And that's why I think, the geography comparisons are so important, is to understand not only in a region or a province, to what degree are those target markets already migrating into the region? And are they possibly bypassing those neighborhoods because there are no choices? So we first have to find a way to prove, to demonstrate with the data that they are indeed inclined to move into that community or into that region. And if we can pin that down, then it's an easy hypothesis to say, all right, well, they're moving here, just not to this neighborhood. So if we build what they want, there's a very good chance that we could attract them and intercept them. And so we still have to lean on the data. It really becomes a geography question.
Thank you. And we have a couple comments and questions here that I think that Justin can comment on. So we have a comment from Fiona saying that, builders that are actually counting on city planners to tell them what they can build, and they would be doing things differently if that were part of the plan. And then we have this comment from Jim as well, saying that if the city wants to, they can kind of switch to acting like a developer rather than a planner. They can think about, what do we actually want to create here? We're back to that vision comment of Rino's, envisioning what you want to see in the city. And I would love to hear from Justin on how those things have played out in your work, because that seems to be what it is that you're doing. You're trying to give instruction to the developers and actually recruit developers or cultivate developers that can fulfill a particular vision for a place using Sharon's work. And can you share with us what that actually looks like from a city that's taking that kind of initiative?
Sure. So it's a complicated process. Trying to change the way a city has operated, or a township or a village, for years and years. And as Tom stated, it's very reactionary. It's very, let's address it when it happens, to starting to think more proactively about being an economic development or a development partner. There is a conversation that needs to be had within the community. Those communities that put a vision in place that, as I stated a little bit ago, sort of complete the picture and bring the ecosystem into balance around development, will achieve the best implementable results. And it's about changing the idea that when we're Sharon used Hamtramck earlier as an example. They had vacant land that they wanted to sell to attract new housing development to those properties, about 90 parcels. And one of the things that they were grappling with their city council is the value of the land and what they were trying to sell it for. And the council's position was, we need to sell this for maximum profit or maximum dollar for the community because we are a community that is economically challenged, and we need to get as much of that money as we can. And I wanted them to sort of rethink the position as those properties are currently positioned right now with zero building on them, vacant lots. They're not really bringing in a lot of tax revenue for the community. So if the community were to, in exchange for new construction, through a mutually agreed upon development agreement with the developer, give that land in exchange for new housing, the amount of money that they're going to get and the new taxes generated by housing being on that land is far greater over time than the amount that they're going to recover in that one-time sale. So it's a matter of economics and understanding what the resources are within the community and how the finances work and rethinking about the long-term sustainability of the community with that new construction versus the short-term gain of just selling the land to a potential speculator. So that's a lot of the things that we look at with these communities that we're working with. And it starts, like I said, again, with the data. We need to understand the data, what the potential is. But if the policies do not, sort of open the door for the new development to occur, then the community is going to continue going down the same path of no implementation. Additionally, if they do not have the understanding of the finances or the vision for the site and the willingness to sort of meet the developer in the middle, then they will again continue to go down the cycle of no implementation. This is really important, that development is the result of balance within the development ecosystem. It's not the other way around.
I just wanted to hop in and add to what Justin mentioned is that, again, so councils, politicians, oftentimes we're very short-sighted. We look 4-8 years out. That's the lifespan of many politicians' careers. So we take what's in front of us, and that's why sprawl and quick development, development charges coming in as growth, basically this sort of Ponzi scheme that a lot of smaller communities or sprawl dependent communities have had. But to Justin's point, if you have a specific amount of land, you're looking to get the highest value because that's what you think is financially responsible to your residents. But what you're not doing is you're not getting the outcome. We have had situations where we've sold land and people sit on it for years and nothing happens with it because the cost is not actually just the taxes coming in. It's actually the detrimental effects that an empty lot and blight and those types of things have on your community, reduction of property values around you. The domino effect is huge. So as opposed to, for example, as Justin was saying, if you have a property, you make a checklist. If you satisfy these conditions, we will give you that property for free. If you satisfy half the conditions, it's half the market value. If it satisfies no conditions, then you're paying full market value. Cities also have to take a role here. And I think Annika would be upset if we never mentioned the idea with some of these checklists to also try to hit some of our climate targets. As a municipality, we should be demanding more from people building a lot of the new housing and a lot of the new buildings. We're going on a building boom across North America, and we're going to see millions of new homes and new units built across the country. What if all of them were carbon neutral? And what if we use tax incentives and incentives for land leases or land sales to encourage that and actually get those outcomes for the new builds, but using the incentives and using the leverage, leading as communities and leading as municipalities to get the results that we want. We are so passive when we're always on our hands. And in that case, and what Justin described is what we see across the board is we need to get the most money for this land because it seems irresponsible financially to our community. But it really has a bigger financial impact by just selling it and sitting back. And so you need to take a different look and very much look at it holistically. What are your outcomes? Sometimes you take less for land and less for even taxes to create a better neighborhood or to create a better public space or something that's going to induce public space being used in the area. And again, Montreal does this brilliantly. And so we can see how the outcomes should be driving it. And the outcomes are not always financial. They're tied to the city building and the vision of the city that you want. And so, and that's the one thing municipalities, councils, politicians don't do well. And it's something that we need to change the outlook and the way that we look at it and start using the idea of housing and new development as the channel to do that.
That's exactly correct. And in the case of Hamtramck, what we did is we had a very specific development agreement in place that stated, you know, the city would exchange, in exchange for selling this property, will receive this type of housing development. It was a commitment from the developer, and it had a time frame. It was, you know, 1 year from the execution of the agreement, and they could get one extension. And there was a clawback. If the developer did not meet that agreement and stick to that agreement, then the city took the property back. They made it clear at the very beginning of this process that they were not selling these vacant lots for side lots or community gardens. They wanted them for the specific purposes of housing. And if you were not willing to commit to build new housing, you were not buying a lot.
That's a really powerful example. I would love to get deeper into this idea of the vision that you can have as a city. And if we could do in our final 8 minutes here, just sort of a round robin of everyone describing how your work, your profession, your experience of this would be different if cities were taking this approach of figuring out specifically what they needed in terms of building types and trying to directly cultivate that, to think of themselves as the developer of their place rather than the recipient of development in their place. So if we could just go around, we'll start with you, Justin, because you're on screen for me.
Well, if that were the case, I'd be out of a job as a consultant. So no, I think for me, I consider myself more of an economic developer than a practicing planner. And for me, it's about the implementation. What does it take to get deals done? What does it take to get people to the table? So I really don't like focusing on theory and concept. It's what are the barriers currently in place that are preventing our ultimate results, and what do we need to do to remove those barriers? And that's probably one of the most rewarding parts of what I do, is working with these municipalities to understand it's not us versus the developer or the developer versus us or the neighborhood versus the developer. We're all in this together, and facilitating those conversations for me is extremely rewarding. And then the aha moment when we can align those policies.
Awesome. Let's go to Dorian.
To be perfectly honest, it would make my life a lot easier under your scenario if cities were more prescriptive as to what they wanted. Then you would have less work to do with clients, bringing them to the table to really do the right thing. In some cases, sometimes you have great clients, sometimes you have more reluctant clients, and so that would be something that I think would be good. But there's just two things I want to touch on. The first one is, within that vision, one thing that we haven't talked about is renovation, restoration, and adaptive reuse as vehicles to make cities more resilient and to have them respond to climate change. But by not having to build new buildings, there's stock out there that can be renovated in almost any older city. And so we need to really consider that, and I'd be interested in how Sharon's target market analysis would incorporate that thinking. The other thing that we only touch on that I think is important from the city's vision standpoint is the public space that people are going to move to. Because we're in this housing crisis, everything is housing. But you have to have a place that people want to live in that is worth caring about. And that comes down to public amenities, the streets, the parks, the commercial areas. It's got to be a holistic approach. And I think sometimes we get a little bit too focused on one thing that's sort of the hot item of the moment. And I want to caution us and cities to think broader.
Love it. I love that you're bringing climate in there too and the renovation. That isn't something that we talked about, but I imagine that Sharon's probably got a whole, she's probably got a whole description of people that are demanding renovated homes. Tom, let's go to you.
Well, I think one of the things that has brought me to local government is that it seems to be one of the places where you can have conversations on the ground floor with people who disagree, find common ground, and find ways to move forward, to move the community forward. And I think that, with COVID, I think we're more isolated, we're more marginalized, fragmented, and polarized. And for me, that's where we need to come back to that local ground level, talk to your neighbor, talk to your neighborhood, not in a way that's combative or where folks are, self-appointing to represent, but in a way where people really understand the social contract that, if you're going to live in a democracy, you have a responsibility to educate yourself about local issues, local policy issues, to a place where you can actually join the conversation. And this is something that everybody can do. And so, when we talk about the community, the culture of a community, that is supposed to be expressed in our master plan. And we're supposed to have robust conversations with our community members about what they want the future to look like. But we've gotten to a place where people just want to oppose any change and instead of managing that change. And I think that's where we get really bad outcomes, because that's where we get, smart, sophisticated developers that know how to read a zoning text that was written in 1965 and use it to get the projects that are going to be most advantageous from a market perspective, as opposed to, the opposite, where we engage the community in a dialogue about the kind of community we want to be, and then figure out how to use the tools we have to move the market in a way that does, balance the development pressures with the community building. So that is what we're trying to do. In some ways, it can be very frustrating and demoralizing, but the way that I try to look at it is really like focus on the positive. There's so many, individual conversations that I have every day where I realize that even though, I in my position and in government, we deal with a concentration of angry people because usually they're only talking to us when they want something or something's wrong. If we can get out there and really talk to folks, meet them at their level in a non-angry moments, we can have really productive conversations. And that's kind of what keeps me energized and keeps me going.
Yeah, it sounds like a lot more empowerment for people to be involved in the way that their city is changing, and that change is a given for all of us. And so being empowered in that. Rino, we've got a minute for you, and we're going to do a quick close with Sharon after that.
Sure. This idea of what our cities would look like is the goal that politicians like me are striving for. And one of the things I say often at committee is that we always hear from people who are protective of the people who live there, but we never talk about the people who are going to live there, who are coming to the community. And that's what planning and zoning and development really starts to look at. So what community do you want to see? And if we saw a community like that, where we control the development, we're part of the development, we also wouldn't always just be, sort of looking backwards and worrying about our piece of the pie, worrying about your neighborhood, your house, and how much taxes you pay. If we were doing things that were more economically sustainable and more environmentally sustainable, you would start to talk about the places and the things that you're creating that you want to be in. And Dorian made the good example of, we don't talk about the public spaces. And the public spaces, the conversation happens because that's what we need to pay for with those tax dollars. And with proper planning, with proper zoning, with development that actually works for the city and creates a sustainable model, those public spaces become easy to pay for. It's not a huge increase in your taxes. It's not something that, some lefty is going to come in and increase your taxes to create public space. the public spaces follow the investment and it almost becomes this yin yang of you forget what's first, the chicken and the egg, and you start to create these huge communities. And I go back to Montreal as the example. It's seen across the world as one of the greatest cities to live in. It's very low density, but it's done right. And some of those aspects in communities, if politicians had more of that approach and were willing to sort of go beyond what people are expecting today, you would see communities really flourish and really not worry about this idea of how low my taxes are, but we would talk about the quality of the city you lived in. So it's that focus should really be what we're talking about. We shouldn't be talking about how much tax we pay. We should be talking about how awesome is my neighborhood and how awesome is my city. And that's the culture change that would happen if you did things differently.
Thank you, Rino. And we're at 1:31, but if anyone would like to stay around for an extra 30 seconds, I know Sharon will bring us home in a strong way.
Oh yeah, thank you. This has been a great conversation and dialogue and awesome panelists. Thank you, everyone. I just circling it all the way back around to data, really it's the market data that is the foundation of getting it done. And if cities had been more progressive and more proactive in the start, it would have made the analysis much easier. So imagine one of the biggest challenges that I'm facing with missing middle is if you have a community that doesn't have duplexes or townhomes or small walk-up apartment buildings in urban places, then it's really, really hard for me to measure that there's a need, that there's a market for it. If they're not there, or if the residents and the renters and the buyers of those products are not there yet, then how do I measure them? And that's my daily challenge. That's why it comes down to geography again, understanding that these are regional studies so that we can understand who's really migrating and moving within these markets, what are they looking for, and making sure that we have the data to start so that we can continue to circle back and expand on these discussions about what do we need to do to get there? How do we get it built? And how do we get real projects done? So thank you.
Thank you very much, everyone. And I'm going to give it right back to Annika. Thank you so much for having me here today.
Thank you so much, Grace, and thanks to everyone. I'll be very quick. Just again, one more round of gratitude and thanks to all of our panelists today, to Sharon for leading us through the workshop side of things, and to all of our discussants for bringing your own perspectives. Just reaffirms, I think, why the city space is the most exciting one to work in. Hearing Tom talk about the ideal of the sort of the commons and the robust discussion that can take place about the kind of lives we want to live and the way we want to interact with ourselves and how the built environment comes into that. And hearing Rino talk about a vision. I mean, these are the pieces that just make this the most inspiring place to be. We're coming into municipal elections across the province in the fall. There's going to be a lot of conversation about what we want these communities to look like, what people need, and also, or what people want, and also what we need as communities. And it comes back to the climate and infrastructure costs and all kinds of those pieces. So thank you so much for bringing all of that in to your conversations as well. I want to thank our sponsors again, in addition to the Center for Cities, to say thank you to the Smart Prosperity Institute at Ottawa U, as well as the Canadian Urban Institute, both of whom are doing great programming of their own. So please do check them out on issues of great relevance to cities. Thanks again to the other folks who were a really key piece of the planning today, Princess Doe, and congratulations again on your graduation, Princess. Thanks again to Jim Tischler and to Rino Bortolin as members of that planning committee. Just a reminder, the recording will be up and ready to go later today, and we will send that out to all participants. So please do feel free to share with any other colleagues. And please do tune in again for the next 3 Tuesdays as we continue the conversation. Next week, we'll be looking at community land trusts, cooperative housing, and in particular, and social housing a little bit as a comparator. So please do tune in for that one. All of the links for registration and for the details will be being populated over the next few days, but they're all up there on the link that you had to register today. Thanks again to everyone. Have a great afternoon, and I will see you again soon.